for how people are doing. So I think let's move on to the bulk of this meeting, which is to share with each other our experiences, our thoughts, feelings, hopes, challenges about the election and moving forward, backwards, forwards, backwards, hopefully just mostly forwards. So I think we pretty much agreed as steering committee that we wanted to leave things very fluid and open for people to just share as you wish. Maybe, I think just if you want to use the, I think there are now 11 of us here. It might be easiest to use the raise your hand feature, or just, we'll kind of see how it goes. If we don't need that, if it turns out we need it later, we can use that. But for now, I think just go ahead and share. How are people feeling? And certainly the news from that Abby just shared has got to be helping us all feel a little bit more relaxed.
Maybe until January.
What's that?
Until January, then we'll feel relaxed.
How are people just feeling in general after having experienced what we just went through? And they're still going through.
I feel like I'm really amazed that the whole election sort of machinery worked and held. You know, just every other institution, it seems to me, has collapsed under Trump, but that seemed to have held, and I like hard and fast held. So I don't know how that happened, but I'm really glad it did.
Yeah.
I would like to think that the Republicans who that the Republicans may have realized that if Trump cast doubt on the elections, that cast doubt on their own elections. And also, they did really well down ballot. If they had lost seats, they might be more reluctant to support the results that we got.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I think, well, I guess we were all very much on edge that first week afterwards. And we had that protect the vote call that went out for everyone. And we had our own complications when, you know, the call was going to go out possibly the day after the election, and it didn't go out. And we ended up using the date to celebrate on the following Saturday. And in fact, there's actually currently another call for a mobilization on the Friday after Thanksgiving, which is about supporting a peaceful transition. I don't know if we're going to be participating in that, but that's something that Sue Ellen and I have been emailing about with Louise, yes, as to whether we want to plan something in Watertown. I'm not sure it's necessary right now. Yesterday, when we were still waiting on the GSA, I was thinking that people might want to do that, but. And there was also a very long conference call with the Protect the Vote people that laid out the various stages of how securing an actual transition is going to go. So we've had the vote, we've had the count, and right now we're going through the certifications, and that's supposed to be done by December 8th. And then we have the Electoral College on the 14th, and then we'll finally have the end of the transition on the 20th of January.
Yeah, Pam and I were on that meeting with the Protect the Results folks. It was a really helpful meeting in a lot of ways, not just because there were presentations about the timelines and what to expect and what had been happening and up till that moment, in fact, what was happening. But there was also a huge apology from the kind of equivalent of a steering committee of the folks there, because there were a lot of communication issues that went on right after the election, whether we were going to mobilize or weren't going to mobilize. And we were all told that, or Pam and I as co-hosts were told that we'd have the word by noon. And there was no word at noon. There was no word at 12:15. And I was sort of writing to the people through their chat mechanism that they had set up on their website. And really, finally, Pam and I just had to decide, I don't know, around 1 o'clock or so, I think, to go ahead and just put out word that we were having a celebration. So there are a number of people who were annoyed that they didn't get the word until very late, and they would have not gone on for hikes. They would have, in fact, wanted to come and to appear in Watertown Square. So it was a little tricky, but folks, they were very apologetic and basically explained how things got more complicated at their end. And they're working really hard to improve so that that kind of stuff doesn't happen again in the future. And basically taking the approach that local hosts have an independence and can make decisions on their own, not needing the national folks. And that if there's a need for a national mobilization, that they will definitely be in touch with us. But was that your understanding, Pam, that basically they're saying there are people having events, all over the country, deciding on their own through the Protect the Results initiative and mobilize?
Yeah, they just said, we're kind of glad that you guys went ahead and did it. And it was definitely my impression, especially larger events like the one in Boston, we're pretty committed to having something happen on the 4th. And they couldn't just change the date on the fly the way we did.
Right.
Yeah.
And we ended up with over 600 people registered for Watertown for the Protect the Results. It was pretty amazing. People from all the surrounding towns, and some actually kind of far out. I think people who just weren't comfortable going into Boston, who were prepared to come here. And then of course we didn't end up having a protest in that way. It ended up being just our sort of celebrating and deciding to take the position with the Protect, which the mobilized folks insisted on taking, which is to be confident at this point and act as if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have won, and not to get wrapped up in too much of all the machinations that were going on.
Yeah, that was the main message that I took away from this, was to push back on people who say, well, it looks like we're 99% certain that Biden's going to be sworn in January, and we want to project confidence and inevitability. And I feel like just getting that GSA thing through feels a lot easier. Like every little step makes it easier. Hi, Merle, would you like to say something?
Well, I would like to actually ask other people if they are in the same place where I am. But I was, of course, I made phone calls and did the whole letter writing, and was, I kind of put myself on hold until the election was over in a lot of ways. Any kind of other activity, it just seemed so much more important to work on the presidential campaign. Since the election, I've moved my focus to what I can do locally. And I wonder if other people have the same shift in focus. Well, what's it been like for you after having geared up?
Merle, I couldn't hear you. What did you say? Since the election, you changed your focus. What did you say?
Oh, I was so focused on the presidential election.
And then after, I lost it.
Oh, after I became more interested in what I could do locally.
Okay, I
So,
got it. All right.
Watching and trying to get involved. And I guess one thing that strikes me that's quite consistent between the national election in Watertown is how little communication there is between opposing sides. I've been attending a lot of meetings in Watertown, and the the progressives, we all talk to each other but I never seem to be at meetings where there are old timers, people, the other kind of side, and the lack of dialogue in Watertown seems kind of similar to the lack of dialogue between conservatives and liberals across the country. Has that struck anybody else?
That's sort of an ongoing problem. Yeah.
I mean, for me, after the election, I mean, I was very excited Biden won and Harris won, obviously, but I was so disturbed by the number of people who voted for Trump. I was so disheartened that how could so many people vote for this person? And in, in every community we have any connection with, the country, a state, a town, there are Trump voters. And it's like, how could this be? How could they forgive him for? So that's been for me very disheartening. And whenever I listen to, stories about like Trump supporters, like they're so sad and that they're so upset. And so it's like, there's no way he could have lost this election. It's just like, what? It's like, so that for me is very hard, but I am trying. We have one neighbor in my neighborhood, catty corner from us, who's a big Trump supporter. He has a big Trump cutout in his window. And so, but we've been reaching out to him, like, because he loves to take care of his yard, as does my husband. And so we're bonding over yard work. I'm trying to and he knows, I mean, we have Black Lives Matters and Steve Owens. We have all these signs out there, and he has Trump signs, but we're talking. We're
We
like,
need to do more of that. I brought brownies up to my neighbors, my Republican neighbors, on the morning after the election, because I felt I just needed to do it.
yeah.
Good for you. So I think Rita's been waiting to speak.
So my initial thoughts after the election were pure joy. This has been a 4-year endeavor, a lot of work. I was pretty secure that Biden, I actually went to bed on Tuesday night. I was pretty secure because I have been tracking the numbers, not any of the polls. I've been pulling numbers from various sources. And I was pretty secure that not that he had 7% that they were reporting, but that he had enough to win. Whether it was 2 or 3%, I knew he was going to win. I am very, so that was reassuring. I was very happy with the media for starting the campaign of the election is going to be a week. It's not going to be over. It was finally nice to see the media, and I mean all of the media, whatever outlet people are listening to finally grow a backbone and state a fact.
Yeah.
Because it's always like, oh, we don't want to offend anybody. But like, it was nice to finally see that and finally defend actual facts that this election is not going to be over in one day. I wasn't so much disappointed by the people who voted for Trump because they were going to vote for him anyway. And when you look at the numbers, they really only represent 1/3 of the eligible population for voting. So 50 million people who are registered to vote still stayed home. We haven't heard from them. We don't know if they're Biden. We don't know if they're Trump. Something like 240 people are eligible, but only a little over 200 are actually registered. So we haven't heard from those people either.
Mm.
So this idea that it's half and half and it's this great divide, I'm a little bit sour on that. Like when I hear that, I'm like, we haven't heard from 1/3 of the population who is eligible to vote. So maybe we should focus our energies on getting those people into the electorate and having them be habitual voters rather than trying to change the minds of people who are Trump supporters, because there are a huge spectrum of Trump supporters. Some of them are like, they just want their tax break, or they're there for one particular issue, such as abortion, and no matter what you say to them, you're not gonna get them unhinged. You're not gonna extract them from that one issue. Some people literally, like evangelicals, they voted for him because he was gonna deliver the goods on abortion. So how can you argue with somebody who is going against their own belief system?
Abby,
Well, I'd like to say something, but Tony was trying to get in a minute ago. Do you want to go first, Tony?
you're
No, I'll
muted.
wait. I was it was the first comment way back, so go ahead.
Okay,
I'll
go
catch
back.
up. I'll catch up.
So two things. To Merle's comment, this is an old challenge. I mean, we talk about that in the peace movement and in Watertown Community Conversations about how you get people from, quote, the other side, because the people who are trying to convene dialogues are usually people on the left. So it is a problem of getting the other people in the room. As a facilitator who is committed to bringing people together and conflict resolution, my first impulse was, how do we reconnect people in the country? And there is a divide. I did hear what Rita said. There was that third of the population who didn't vote. Nonetheless, we're polarized. Do you know this author named Anand Giridharadas?
Yes.
Say it again.
Well,
Put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat, yeah, so we can.
It's a rather long. His first name is Anand. He's a very progressive. Giridharadas, something like that. I'm sure I don't have the spelling right. He's the fellow who wrote a book on billionaires and the fact that we should not have billionaires. That the idea that philanthropy comes from them solely is actually a distortion of the way that a democratic society should operate. He had a brilliant conversation with Masha Gessen, if you know who she is. Masha is the Russian journalist. She's now American, Russian journalist. Putin threw her out of Russia. She's written any number of books on autocracy. And they talked about the fact that there was an autocratic moment at the point of the election when there was danger that Trump would be elected, and then we would have had this autocratic breakthrough and so forth. Anyway, and he said, why is everyone calling for unity at this point? That he wasn't there, and there was something about the people who tried to destroy the democratic institutions, the democratic backbone isn't the word. What's the word I'm looking for? The framework of this country. And I thought about it, and I thought, absolutely, I am so with him right now. I am absolutely not interested in unity. I'm very, very disturbed. But yeah, Merle, I'm not, because I'm so disturbed that that there are people who support Trump, who think it's okay to bring rifles and arms to a polling state, is that how you call the voting station?
Polling
Place. That they can walk into the city hall or state capitol in Michigan with their arms, that it's okay to intimidate people trying to vote, and on and on and on. And Merle, what I do feel towards them is some compassion for, I get that they feel dispossessed, disenfranchised, not, ignored, that their jobs have gone. I get all of that, and I have compassion for that, but that does not equal compassion for their behavior, which I have found extremely destructive.
Right.
And I think it's a both and. The other thing I wanted to say to Deborah's point, Deborah, you said something about, well, the democratic structures worked after all, like, right? Like they came through.
Well, just that one.
Oh, you mean the GSA, Emily?
No, I mean the electoral structures held. I didn't.
As opposed to the courts and other things.
Yes.
Well, the courts did help
Oh,
at the
I
federal
see.
level.
So here's my feeling about that, Deborah. It's this.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. Like
Yeah.
how do you say when you kind of sneak in a win?
Yeah.
Like we were this close and we
Yeah.
just snuck. And the fact that some Republicans spoke up, but the bulk of them didn't. And that the courts, oh my God, that the judges threw out their appeals. I just feel like it came this close. So I'm upset. To Sue Ellen's question, Sue Ellen, I'm exhausted. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm so concerned about what needs to be rebuilt in this country. Just in terms of the voting structure, restoration of voting rights, not disenfranchising 300,000 African-American voters. The ability to, did you hear yesterday that at the recount in Michigan, the Republican observers were inserting themselves and asking questions after every single ballot, like, why are you approving that one? They just got in the way. So to me, there's an enormous amount of work, which I know you all know this. So I'm just kind of venting some of my frustration.
You're ranting, Abby, but I agree.
I want to welcome Chuck, who has appeared. Hi, Chuck.
Hey, everybody. Sorry I'm late.
Okay. Do you want
I wanted just to pipe in a second on, I understand it's been this constant for the last, well, maybe more intense in the last week, but even though it was in the beginning, but more intense than the last week. It's just following the press a little bit. There's been a lot about, in the first week after the election, about the divide between us, and sort of a lot of them reflecting what Abby was talking about. How do you deal with folks whose behavior was so against what you believe? More recently, there's been these spat of articles, even to the point where someone compared the problem that we need to solve, that we should be taking hints from how marriage counselors do it in the Globe the other day. And I think, and there's been a lot of articles, how do we come together? How do we come together? I think that for me, it's not so much how us as individuals come together, because I have a hard time imagining that the individual of us individually coming together is going to have a cumulative effect of making any change on a larger level. So that I'm not sure whether, if we sponsored a program in Watertown where we wanted to invite folks who voted for Biden and invite folks who voted for Trump to come together and to use some of the techniques of marriage counseling to have a dialogue. I'm not sure that eventually would lead to a larger movement of people doing that, or that would have a sort of a national effect, even if that was done in communities throughout the country. I'm not saying that that's not important to do. I think that we could mend some fences, and we can maybe find some common ground. I would, just as a caveat, say I'm wondering how many people would have brought brownies to Merrill if we had lost, and would have been willing to reach out across the aisle to say, hey, I know it must be hard, but So for me, the question really more lies around the issue of policy. And what can we see happening on a policy level? And I am a little bit afraid that for me, Biden is a neoliberal. He has been a neoliberal most of his life, neoliberal and foreign policy, maybe not as neoliberal on economic policy in this country, but in general, he is I would consider a neoliberal. And I'm very, very concerned that the policies he's going to be putting forth are those that are too accommodating to the to the Trump believers. This is a rare opportunity for progressive policies to be put forth. I'm not particularly excited about who we picked for the Secretary of the Treasury. I don't know much about the Secretary of State, but so far we haven't seen the kind of appointments that would make you think this man is learning from those he competed against in the primary. So my feeling is that we need to stay strong about what we believe the policy should be, and that we might be able to find some common ground with people. For example, on healthcare, I can't imagine that maybe there aren't some Trump supporters who, who, as others have said, might have voted for him because of a single issue, but when push comes to shove, they want a healthcare policy that serves their family. They may be pro-abortion, anti-abortion, and that's why they supported him. But if we talk about healthcare, they don't want to pay a huge amount, and they would. Is there some common space around jobs? Is there some place there that we can find support for more manufacturing jobs that would affect both Trump and again, they could be single issue people, but they all do want to make a living. So I'm not sure we'd find that same support when it comes to issues around voting rights. That's one of the biggest things that I'd love to see our president-elect do. That is to move quickly on a new voting rights bill as soon as possible. I'm not sure we'd get common ground around immigration, though. There's a potential there. Maybe that there's a possibility around there. We will find I think you'll find common ground about, because I don't expect a lot from Biden around U.S. military policy. I don't expect significant cuts in the budget. I don't expect some positive things around Israeli-Palestinian issues. I unfortunately expect him to be more pro-troop involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq than Trump. But there are some domestic issues where we might be able to find some common ground. And I'm hoping that we can, play on those to build some commonality between people. I do think, though, it would be very interesting if Watertown citizens decided to embark on an afternoon Zoom of Bush. I'm sorry, I keep saying Bush, Trump, and
supporters maybe.
Trump and Biden supporters. But I'll stop at that.
That would be something. I just wanted to ask if people could mute when they're not speaking, because there's some background noise that keeps going on. I'm not quite sure what it's coming from. It just stopped. Okay.
So I'm hesitant to be involved in any sort of meeting with Trump supporters because I have been on calls where someone like Senator Brownsberger is having a call about police reform, or so and so is having, and everyone, it's not a particularly partisan group, it's an open discussion. And people who tend to be Trump supporters, I won't even call them Republicans, because I've met Republicans, libertarians of every stripe and background, and some of them cross the line for Hillary and they cross the line for Biden. So I categorize Trump supporters differently. And what I've seen on these calls, whether it's police reform, whether it's immigration, they come hard and heavy, and they take up as much air as possible, and they're as rude as possible, to the point where people are like, you need to ask a question or stand down. So if you're ready, I'm just, hesitant. If you want to have some sort of meeting like that, you really, really need to be prepared.
I must say, if we were to do that, even though my role as president is to facilitate, I think I would hand it off to somebody else. It's just,
One of the things I noticed is the Watertown non-progressives have a very low listening, low learning culture. I never see them ask a question. And they're very interested in telling, but it's a conversation style which leads to very little learning. I don't know, and I'm also a conversation professional. I have ways of handling that. But it is, Marilyn Petito Devaney, I think, is not an outlier. She's a standard Watertown type. She's a successful Watertown politician, and she's not quite. When I lived in Belmont, I thought she was on the edges, but
most of us do think she's on the edges.
there's a lot of people in Watertown like her.
Yes, it's true, but she may end up in jail, so we'll see.
Well,
I don't know if you all saw the article about.
Oh, what's happening? Why would she end up in jail?
Oh, several weeks ago, there's an article that she was caught on video at 11 p.m. at night, fishing around in somebody's mailbox, taking mail out of their mailbox, someone who lives a few blocks away. And that's still all under investigation. So, and the reporter had spoken with her as well as the person who reported this incident. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you can Google Marilyn Devaney. And
that's actually really sad. Wasn't there like a shoplifting incident?
Well, no, there was an incident a few years ago when she threw a curling iron at
right.
Yeah. Anyway, but tampering with someone's mailbox is a federal offense. That's a felony.
Well, right, but if you're going after like a welfare check or what? It's like ridiculous.
No. Anyway, it's kind of off subject, but
I know that's very sad.
You can find the article if you just Google it.
I see that.
I don't mean to be sort of nasty and gossipy. I'm just pointing out there's a transmit only style, which Rita noticed that is fairly prevalent.
Yes.
It's not, we progressives are just as bad too sometimes.
So Susan raised an interesting question about should we be congratulating Biden for appointing like a Latinx and Black women to his cabinet picks. I've seen people already getting ahead of it, asking to make sure he doesn't appoint corporatists. And so far, with the exception of Janet Yellen, I've never heard of any of these people before, but they almost always turn out to be someone that worked with him all the way back to the Senate or in the previous Biden administration. Not the previous Biden, the Obama administration. So he's going after very, to him, old school people that he already knows. And there's not a lot of people that are a lot younger than him, but I wouldn't call them fresh blood or progressive picks yet.
Deborah.
I think it's like.
Hang on, Susan. I think Deborah's been waiting to speak.
Deborah's talk.
You're muted, Deborah.
I just don't have any faith in any kind of communication or working with Trump supporters. I think they're possessed. I think they're behaving in a way that our normal understanding of human behavior and group behavior just doesn't work. And so I'm kind of with Rita. I think we should just be saying, okay, we can't do anything with them. Let's see if we can't, open up our sort of pool to people who have been disconnected to the electoral system, and reach out. I would rather spend my energy reaching out locally even to that. And I think Stacey Abrams, what she did, is a model. It's like, don't try and convince the Trump supporters. Go out and, do your grassroots, do your local work to engage people who are previously unengaged. So that's where I am.
I agree. I've seen too many essays of people saying, I spent the last 4 years trying to reach out to Trump people, and the best they get is, well, you're okay, but the rest of those guys, forget it. And it's just not, it doesn't seem to be paying off.
They not only don't listen, but they just sort of have their own reality
But I
that
think
they
it's important.
project.
The they part is a little bit concerning. I think, as Rita pointed out, you can't just lump all these Trump supporters together.
I kind of do. I do. I mean, they just are in lockstep, like crazy, factless, statements.
Well,
I want to just speak up about that one, if I may
Me
jump
too.
in, if I may.
Yeah.
I think that I agree with Sue Ellen about this. Be careful about lumping all Trump supporters together in one kind of group of crazies. I think that there's a core of that. There certainly are. I don't know what percentage of what that is, but there's a core that they're just, no matter what, they're the QAnon people and all the rest. But I think there are a lot of other people who are, for whatever reasons, disaffected with where this country's going in terms of systemic changes, in terms of income, jobs, security, economic inequality. And I think they've been seduced by Trump somehow. I've been reading the Nicholas Kristof book, Tightrope, where he talks about what has happened in his communities up in Oregon, where he grew up in rural Oregon, and talking about the people his age, his generation, that rode the bus with him to school, who are now wasted, suicide, all the rest, because of loss of jobs and all the rest. And those are Trump supporters. And I think that, to me, the issue is what Tony was talking about, is real policy change. So to me, it's what happens in Georgia. And if we can take those seats, probably not, but somehow then I think Biden's ability to get people who can work deals across the aisle are going to be crucial. And so I think this is the reality. We're in a world now where at least we're in a position where we have some control of the process, and hopefully Biden will be able to facilitate it to make some real changes. Just one other point I want to make. My neighbor Randy turns out is a Trump supporter, and he and I have engaged in conversations, very gingerly up until recently. And I decided to just take it on head on. And several things emerged in the course of our talking. One is that he completely is in another information world, which is, I knew, Fox, and I'm in another world. And we agreed that, maybe we could start exchanging sources of information. I suggested, well, why don't we take, for a week, I'll listen to half an hour a day of your sources, and you listen to half an hour a day of my sources, and then we'll see where we end up. He thought that was an interesting idea. The other thing, we got to talking about the role of government, and I said, I think healthcare is an area where government can really make a difference. And he jumped in on that like gangbusters and said, absolutely, and went on a whole rant about how his mother couldn't get, the appropriate care she needed because the insurance companies are ripping everybody off. So I think there are areas where there can be progress, and I don't think all Trump people are all just the same. That's my.
I wanted to add to what Chuck said, because I work with immigrant parents in Boston. I teach them. I supervise a number of other teachers who teach them. And what's really shocking the idea that any immigrants would support Trump is like totally shocking. So in my current class, which is mainly like Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, they don't support Trump. And I make no, pretense of like being unbiased. It's like we all talk about how horrible Trump is. But in East Boston, where there are a lot of evangelical Central Americans, some of the teachers I work with, half of their immigrant classes are Trump supporters, and they're wonderful people. It's just that they go to an evangelical church where abortion is like the primary issue, and they say you've got to support Trump because he's anti-choice, he's anti-abortion. So it's just like they're wonderful people. They're just like, I mean, the churches, these evangelical churches are they are like really, I mean, they should lose their what's it called, the nonprofit status for sure, because they're totally telling people who they should vote for. A lot of these people can't vote anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but what they should believe. And it's horrifying, but they're not terrible people. They are like anti-abortion. And so this is like a single issue, and the church tells them this is the way you should vote, and that's the way they vote, or would support if they could vote.
Yola?
Yeah, I agree. I agree about that. I'm immigrant, and I know many of my friends and family members. They're against, they vote Republicans because of abortion. And it's not just evangelical church, all churches, Catholic, Orthodox, like Syrian churches, Syriac, they're all against abortion. And they all, like all my friends, almost, they don't vote Democrat because of that. So unfortunately, it is a big issue. And I know many of Syrians who, Trump is definitely against, they vote against their own interest. They're Republican. I know someone who's Muslim, and in the beginning when Trump won, and he was like, all these 7 countries, they're not allowed to come in because Muslim background, they voted with Trump. There are some issues that I can't comprehend it, because I feel it's morally against my, against my moral issues. But unfortunately, many of my family members, and I can't disown them. So we have, I think, I know some people I couldn't take and I had to block, like a friend of mine, she's very religious, very I just couldn't take her. So I had to block her. But, I can't do that with everybody. So, and I can tell because many of them, they don't want to wear masks. They don't want to, it just, with all, with the coronavirus, with everything that we're going through, and they still refuse to wear masks, which I can't believe. And this person who I blocked, she tried to convince me that I'm wrong for wearing masks, because she said, you're affecting your immune system by wearing this mask. You're not letting your body to get stronger against these viruses. So you're doing the wrong thing. I said, it's okay. I want to do the wrong thing. But it's like on many issues, like where I find it very hard to deal with. But as I said, they're, family members, friends, and you can't just ignore them and just, like we can't talk politics, obviously, because we're on the opposite sides. But on other issues, maybe.
It's very hard. It's so hard to fathom any Muslims voting for Trump, but I know
Yeah.
there's a certain mentality and the anti-science part and the, the sort of irrational stuff and the just sheer, I don't know, I guess you call it his charisma, but his personality is just really able to take over for so many people. And for me, I can't even fathom in the anti-abortion issue, the hypocrisy that so many people that I know who are anti-abortion are pro-death penalty.
Yeah.
And how do you figure that? It's just.
Well, just to think that, they put so many kids in cages and like near the borders, and that didn't bother them. But if I, like, for some reason, I want to have abortion, I'm criminal, that's killing. But so many people support wars and like killing and like bombs and things that kills children and adults, but they're okay with it, especially for me in Syria because of the war. It's very hard for me knowing that someone supported the government who bombed the people, and it was fine with them, but they're still against, abortion, and they come and tell me, no, this is a crime. I said, well, let every woman decide for herself. She can decide if she wants to have it. And they screamed at me because I said that. They were like, no, that's a crime, that's a killing. I said, okay, you can believe whatever you want, but that's how. So I think we need to, we don't have a choice in our life to like say, okay, this guy or this woman or they're Trump supporter, we don't want to deal with them because they're part of our lives too. Like, so we have to find common ground with them.
So, so two things that like Chuck and I'm sorry, is it Eula is your name?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I don't want to mispronounce it. But the idea that there's these different realities to me, I find it mind-boggling because I'm one who always believes that, yes, there's an objective reality and people do come with their own viewpoints, but the sun comes up every day. Call it whatever you want, that big globe in the sky, it comes up every day. And there has to be this return to agreed upon, and I don't even want to say agreed upon facts, because a fact is a fact. So I find that there are some areas where we have to stand up and say, no, this is a fact. We can't even have a conversation before we establish that, a virus is caused by, I couldn't even begin a conversation with somebody who didn't believe in the basics of science.
Well, I just want to let you know that this woman in particular is a biologist. Oh.
So yeah,
I had to block because I could not. It was like too much for me to deal with. But she's a biologist, so
yeah,
science.
The other thing I wanted to say about Chuck's point of view, or the issue that the point that he brought up was, it's hard to say because I always hear this sympathy voice or this apologist voice for the poor Trump person who's been displaced, but we need to remember that a lot of Trump supporters make over 100K, and a lot of Black people have been displaced for over 100 years. They've had their rights taken away. And so for me, I kind of don't, like, I'm sorry, but if you're a white person in this country, whether you're male or female, because there are females who are just as bad as the males in the Trump camp, some of the Trumpers. What is your excuse for not having to get back up? Because a Black person or a person who is Asian America, who, you know, still hasn't been recognized, Asian Americans, you know, they still don't talk about the internment camps. They rarely, you know, our history books don't reflect that. What is your excuse when they've had to overcome so much? Or if you're somebody who's disabled and they get up every day. And so to me, it's like, we kind of have to, I don't know, I want to hold them accountable for decisions that they've made in their lives. You decided to take drugs in high school. I mean, at some point you gotta man up or woman up, or because other people don't even have those opportunities. Like once they get into high school, they mess up one time and college is out the window. The possibility for a Black youth is one arrest and it's gone. So I have a real difficult time.
No, I agree with that.
Rita, I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and. All of what you say is true. But I think all these other parts of the reality are also true. And I think they're part of the equation.
Yep. Yes, so a both and to Chuck and Rita is this point about there's a bit of a misplaced conflict between the liberals or the Democrats and the Republicans, which is there are systemic factors at work here. And so when we blame individuals, what I think is that people don't recognize how they're being manipulated or used by others. Like the Trumpers don't realize how they're being used by Trump and the system. And to Chuck's point, Chuck, I mentioned this earlier about my sense of compassion for the people who feel disenfranchised, who lost their jobs, ignored, dismissed, and all of that. But there are systemic factors at play. The fact that the jobs went away, that the middle class has been decimated. So I think it helps enlarge the picture to help people understand the larger umbrella in which we're all operating, which depersonalizes it a little bit.
It's a good point, Abby. I hearken back to Martin Luther King and the Kingian nonviolence training, and the third principle of the 6 principles. The third one is attack the forces of evil, not the people.
Which brings us back to Tony's comment that it's the policies that matter, and Chuck said the same thing. It's an interesting take. Focus on the policies.
And of course, the policies are only enacted if it is enacted by the people who have power. And that's where the question is, how do we deal with the power issue?
But would you say that the policies also go, it's not just the people at the top, it's also the people, and I don't mean top, bottom economically, I mean top, bottom, so something like education. So I think our schools need to be, the public schools need to be fixed. I think that like I read that high school diploma in 1965 was worth a lot more than and not because of technology change, but because of curriculum change, was worth more than like one in 1982. And then teaching things like civics and getting back to like this idea of research and science. You know I probably was the last class that had a civics course. I graduated in 92. So I don't even know what kids are learning right now. Like, I can't even imagine. Like, I was talking to a friend on Facebook, and she's a substitute teacher, and she was trying to teach the kids about Langston Hughes, and I'm like, they didn't know who Langston Hughes was, and I'm like, oh my God, do they not teach the Harlem Renaissance anymore? And so it's like, it's that. Yeah, I think it needs to start from the bottom up.
I want to just take a step back and think about the sort of places of intersection between Trump and Biden supporters, and I do think that one of the places of intersection where there might be some common ground, in addition to what we've mentioned and what Chuck mentioned around healthcare, and I think that what would be helpful is for progressives to acknowledge what Trump did that was positive. Now, I know you would say, well, what did he do that was positive? I mean, what is it? Now, I don't have a lot of facts in terms of the research on this, but at least a couple of the people that I've been speaking with and reading feel that his trade policies were actually exposed something that many of us were wrong about. That is that our trade policies, we lost a lot of jobs because of our trade policies, and that a lot of communities were decimated in terms of basic jobs and employment. And even some of the sort of liberal folks are saying that, well, maybe that's right. Maybe we need to re-examine our free trade approach. And is there something to the trade policies that he had? The other area, and whether he did it, his motivation, I don't know whether his trade policies, his motivation for them were positive or not. The fact that he did institute some trade policies that might have resulted in bringing certain jobs back to the country is something we need to examine and possibly say we were wrong. The other area, which is his foreign policy. I find it very disheartening that when he talks about reducing troops in Afghanistan, which is going on 19 years, the oldest war we've ever been in, and reducing troops in Iraq, that we get this enormous pushback from the liberal and the conservative and liberal elements within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party about us opposed to such a move. And so that I do think it might find, if we were to look out and try to see points of commonality, would be some things like one of the steps might be to acknowledge that there were things worthwhile that came out of the Trump era, and that we might own that and see if that sort of is a way to to acknowledge people's potential, I'm sorry, a way to think about potential intersections of between the two groups.
Well, I would agree that he didn't start any new wars. But I would take more seriously his efforts to get American troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan if he'd actually managed to get them all out. And instead, it looks like he might be pushing to do something really drastic in the final weeks that will undermine what little positive has been happening over there. I'm curious what sources you have about how his trade policies have affected jobs.
Well, yeah, most of this has been conversation with friends. And like I said, I'd have to take a look at some of the data around this, but I don't have any particular sources, but I think it's something that I've heard progressive people talk about.
I would like to see going forward some way to extract the way our industrialization has become so entwined with China when they're committing human rights abuses with the Uyghurs and the Tibetans and now Hong Kong. And if we could get some of that manufacturing back to the US, that could be something that would serve both purposes of protecting human rights as well as creating jobs.
Well, that certainly, those people who talk about Trump's accomplishments, often I hear them say he's been really tough on China. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, during the campaign, Biden was trying to one up him on being tough on China. China became the whipping boy of the campaign. And Biden was strong, if not stronger than Trump on what they want to do to China. It doesn't, I'm not sure. I think it's generally he's going to be just as bad on. Well, he'll make. I think he'll make Russia another focus of his policies, and not in any way that would lower the temperature between the two countries. But if anything, he's going to increase the temperature between the two countries.
Are we talking about Biden now?
Huh?
You mean Biden now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about Biden.
Yeah.
Abby?
Tony, I appreciate the intention behind what you said. What I want to add to that is what I take issue with is the way that he made decisions, which is as a one-man show without the deliberation that's inherent in democracy, and that bothers me.
Yeah, that's valid, and it's very clear what he's trying to do in the last 3 weeks of the last 2 months, right? I mean, before he's out, right? He's selling land up in Alaska, the rights. He's putting people in place on panels and commissions that have terms longer than 4 years, so they can't be removed by Biden. He's turned over anything that Israel wants. He has given them and continues to do that in a big way. He's just trying to do as much damage as he can in the 2 months that he has left, or the month and a half that he has left. And it is also the fear. I mean, he's going to make it harder for Biden to re-enter the agreement with Iran. And there's some talk of Biden wanting to decide that he wants more concessions from Iran in order to enter into the agreement, and that would be a real disappointment on my part, on what I feel Biden should be doing. But there's no doubt Trump is using these last 6 weeks to make life pretty horrible for the next administration. And And so it's as we all been saying, this is sort of hard to decide what, how to deal with the 70 plus million people who really did go up and vote. And while I think Rita and Deborah maybe are on to something when they say we should be focusing on those people who didn't didn't vote, or who are registered to vote but didn't vote, or who aren't even registered yet and should be registered. But in order to do that, we have to give them something to get excited about.
Absolutely.
I don't, and this is what worries me about the Biden campaign, Biden administration. You want people to get involved. They have to see some positive results to move from registering to voting. We have had the largest turnout in a century in terms of voting. We have to acknowledge that, you know, more people went to the polls than ever before. You know, that is really something to acknowledge. But also, why is that? Well, it's because both camps were motivated, right? I mean, both camps were motivated. And with all the negative things Trump has been doing around the election, the bottom line was many of the down ballots were because of him. People voted Republican because of him. And now there were some places where they lost. The down ballots did not go his way in some states, in some counties. But the reality is he is going to be a force. And it looks like one of the reasons that he's doing this ridiculous effort to make our voting system seem fraud is because he's building a base to start again and to do it in 4 more years to run again. And so we have our work cut out for us both to find ways to bring new people into voting and register more people. We have to give them a reason to do that. And of course, in the immediate, we need to figure out what we can do to help the folks in Georgia at this point. I do want to take advantage of this just to say one thing. I think it's important if Watertown citizens with a letter or an email signed by Sue Ellen, but including the names of the members of the steering committee, gets an email office to Representative Clark. She is our representative, and she was just elected to be the Assistant Speaker of the House. So she's one of the 4 people who are considered the top 4 leadership in the Democratic Party. Now that means that, you know, she'll go a long way from sitting in when she sat in around gun control and she sat in on the House floor to now being a leader, which means that she may not be as progressive as we'd like her to be. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that we have in our district in Watertown, one of the 4 leaders in the Democratic Party in the House. And that's a significant person, and we should cultivate that relationship.
I think we should the steering committee could send a letter congratulating her on her appointment. Yeah, it's a good idea, Tony.
Would it be worth trying to think about, maybe this is a steering committee question, but is there an event we could put together to invite her to?
We could invite her to our annual meeting.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So, but it'd be good if we started off with a note of congratulations from the members of the steering committee.
It's a good idea.
That's her about. She's been on the right side so far.
Yep. No, she's been pretty good, you know, and I'm surprised, actually. I'm somewhat surprised and not surprised. She's an ambitious person. You know, you watch her elevation from to where when she ran for the seat. But at the same time, she's been very strong on guns, very strong on women's issues, very strong a vocal opposition to Trump on many issues. And yet she still has found a way to rise in leadership.
I think there were a couple of hands up earlier. I don't know if people, I think Abby and was it you, Janet? No.
And I think people are dropping out.
Well, I know
Hi,
Mo had to go and Abby's got to go.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Abby.
Bye.
With this, I mean, before we completely wrap up, is this a good time to ask people what they think Watertown citizens should be doing in the near future?
Maybe
I just think we
continue
need to
with the good
continue
work.
Doesn't sound like it's a great time.
doing-
Well,
Hard to say.
I think we should just continue doing what we're doing. You know, I think we continue to do the events that we do, reach out to people, try to grow our membership, try to get more people involved. I mean, we could discuss a campaign just about finding ways to involve more people in our work. I mean, part of what Arun is doing with those flyers that he and Nicole put together, that's a way of reaching out. We could think about, you know, how to more formalize that, and is there a way to make our presence more felt, and given that I think the issues that people are dealing with around Black Lives Matter and climate and pollinators and refugees are all issues that people might find some interest in. So I think we just need to continue and try and build more support. I do think if we can find a way to get more young people involved, that would be nice. And I think that is happening through some of the climate work, right, Deborah? I mean, some of the people who are going to be speaking at that event are from the Sunrise Movement and group, and then the Watertown, you know, what our Black Lives, Citizens for Black Lives, our working group is definitely talking to young people. And I think our event on December, the third Wednesday of December, we should really find a way to make that, push that real hard, and make sure we try to have a good turnout on that.
For those of you who may not have picked this up, so there are two things Tony had mentioned. One is a flyer that Arun developed with Nicole to just advertise Watertown Citizens and the working groups and what we do, and to print a whole bunch of them and get them out, post them and that sort of thing. And then the December meeting is focused on bringing various people representing the groups in Watertown who are working on anti-racism to talk about their work, including our Watertown Citizens for Black Lives group, but other groups as well.
Just to the side also, Watertown Citizens will be, I hope, co-sponsoring again the Unity Breakfast in January 2021, which this year will be a virtual event, and it's going to be quite a different experience, but we're really working hard to do some of the traditional things and maybe some new different things. So in the past, we've always, you know, said that this is sponsored by World in Watertown, co-sponsored with Watertown Citizens for Peace, Justice, and the Environment. We're also going to be saying this year that a partner for us is cable TV, WCA TV, because they're going to be instrumental in helping us put this all together. And I think I'm a couple of weeks late. I almost had the library involved as a formal sponsor, but the person who's responsible for doing their community engagements, his wife's having a baby and he's going to be taking the month of December off. So, but they're potentially interested in being actual former partners, and so maybe in future years. But anyway, we count on Watertown Citizens.
And I have an invoice that I'm just going to send you tonight, Chuck, that will give you the information we talked about earlier.
Oh, good. All right. Thanks, Tony.
Good.
Have you chosen, I don't know if you had a speaker before. What was your speaker this year?
We haven't selected our keynote speaker this year. We're actually out pursuing a few people right now and talking about it. And we've got a working group that's been working on a Unity Award, and I think they're coming to some decision about who they're going to recommend. And we've got a working group that's doing the essays again. Felicia Sullivan is actually leading that working group. And Paul Morton, who did it before, is involved in it. And then we also got a new working group that's doing Story Share, which is part of the Kingian initiative that Swati Sivasubramanian is leading. And we're going to have some stories. Will be people experiencing racial bias in their own personal experiences. Kind of, she said, to interrupt the narrative that it doesn't happen in Watertown.
I do want to mention an event. Can I mention an event?
Sure.
So on December, I think I have this right, December 3rd, Thursday. People have been following the incident that was publicized on Channel 25, News 5, the 25, about the young woman who was raped, was harassed for her support of the Black Lives Movement. And I think I just had her name here.
Layla.
Leila Mawanda.
I did have it a second ago. I don't know where it went. Yes, so she was, she spoke on Channel 25 about the situation and was feeling unsafe in her environment at the school. She was harassed online and in person. And was saying that she didn't feel like her principal at the middle school or the superintendent did enough to address the issue. And then second day, there were two paraprofessionals who used to work in Watertown, who also came forward saying that they had seen racial discrimination and harassment and in the schools. And so that it seems like the superintendent has called a meeting for December 3rd at 6:30 to talk about that. So if people, I don't have any Zoom stuff at this point, but keep an eye out. I'm sure you'll also find it on the website of Watertown, of the Watertown.
Schools, public schools.
Yeah, public schools.
Layla has been part of the Kingian community for quite a while in middle school, and sort of a student of Ruth Henry and Kingian training. And so we have been, in our recent Kingian meeting, we did have a chance to talk about that in breakout groups as well as a whole, and talk about what does it mean to kind of bring this to this level from the press having now been involved, and how do we use that, our presence, and develop power, creative power, and be able to activate the message that we want to send.
I think it's a difficult place to be for the school district, for the district to be at this point. It's very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what the details are. I had one constituent call me, write me, and asked whether the level of harassment can be considered a hate crime, and whether the students, whoever did this, could be prosecuted on as a hate crime. But you know, for a district that put out the ABC, the Anti-Bias Coalition, and for a district that allowed the Kingian curriculum to be part of the middle school, to face something like this is going to be a challenge, and just not so sure how they're going to handle it. And let me just share another piece of news regarding Watertown and being in the press. As you know, Watertown was on the front page of the Boston Herald, and then was the subject of a Howie Carr article. And this has to do with a lawsuit by a former detective, a woman, one of the only women detectives in Watertown Police Department, who is, this was now 5 years old, but she has had a court suit that actually has been moved forward and has not been thrown out. So there will be well, unless it's settled out of court, there will be a trial where this person is suing the city of Watertown, the town of Watertown, and the Watertown, the police department because of a hostile environment towards women and sexual harassment issues. It's, again, we haven't done, there hasn't been a lot of issues around the discussion around sexual harassment. Most of the discussions have been around racial harassment, racial-based harassment. But this may lead to some discussion around the kind of environment that women have to work in. But that's to be determined.
So any other final thoughts, comments people have before we sign off? And I think it is kind of interesting that suddenly Watertown is in the news. That television station picks it up around
You
racial.
don't want it to be on the news.
Not for those reasons, right? But and certainly the issue
Only
around,
for the wrong reasons if it's in the news.
Yeah,
some people would say, there's no such thing as bad press, that all press is good press, but we'll see how things go with the school department and the police department, and certainly
I want to announce the other event that's happening. I really think people would love to be part of this. It's on Zoom, so it's not a lot of heavy lifting, but there is the annual meeting of the Massachusetts Peace Action organization, and it is a multi-sponsored conference on December 5th and 6th. The major environmental groups, major social justice groups, major immigration groups, all have come together to put a program on what's the next 4 years going to look like. And actually, I think they title it as "What Do We Do Now?" And so we're going to hear from a really a very broad diverse group of speakers, nationally and locally. And so it's 2 hours on Saturday, and I believe 2 hours on Sunday. And you can go to our website, and you'll find that they're posted at our website.
yeah, it should be good. Should be great. Any other announcements people might want to make? Okay, I think we're sort of wrapped up. Any final comments about this meeting, about how you experienced tonight's meeting? Helpful, not so helpful?
Yeah.
I just want to apologize to everybody. I had it down for 7:30, which I've done before.